Thank you for joining us on our QTV Business and Economy program. The Business and Economy program is intended to promote the ideals of a corporate Gambia identity with the objective of forging partnerships through dialogue between the public and the private sector, civil society organizations, and the international community. The World Bank 2020 Doing Business Report was released in October of this year. If we compare the World Bank 2020 report to the 2019 report, which shows the ease of doing business in 190 countries, the Gambia, as it were, has slipped from a ranking of 149th in 2019 to 155th in 2020 out of 190 countries. In 2017, during the 2017 UNGA, United Nations General Assembly in New York, President Adama Barrow took credit for the World Economic Forum ranking of the Gambia at the time 117th from 123rd position in the previous year, 2016. That came with much appreciation from the business community, because for the president to have stood at the UNGA making reference to the ease of doing business in the Gambia, we took comfort from it that this is a president that focuses on the business environment, and hopefully we would see the business environment improve as we move on. So what has caused this slip in terms of the ranking from 149th to 155th position out of 190 countries from 2019 to 2020? These are the issues that we shall discuss over the next 1 hour. To help us in our discussions, we have invited Mr. Aliu Badara Senghor. He is a consultant and also the proprietor of Talent Factory Incorporated. Mr. Senghor, a warm welcome to the Business and Economy program.
Thank you very much.
And
thank you very much.
We are grateful for you honoring our invitation.
Thank you for having me as well.
As I indicated earlier, in 2017, President Adama Barrow at the United Nations General Assembly spoke about the improvement in doing business in the Gambia, because at the time our ranking, as per the World Economic Forum report, has improved from 123 to 117th, and that was much joy and delight to the business community, as it were. Not the ranking per se, but the fact that a president would stand at the UNGA making those pronouncements. One would have taken comfort that this is a president that focuses on the business environment, and him being a former businessman, I mean, as well.
That's right.
From your understanding, I mean, or maybe let me just go back. What is your general assessment of the current business environment as it is?
Okay.
I mean, does it seem as if we're taking one step forward and two steps backward, especially if you look at the 2019-2020 ranking in terms of our ease of doing business?
I mean, thank you once again. Thank you very, very much for having me on this platform. I'd like to again commend you as well as the network for, I think, more and more, I think this platform is becoming a center of excellence and knowledge for a lot of Gambia, particularly in a sector that is really the anchor of our growth. And that leads really to your question, Adama Barrow and the private sector and the role. And really this has been enshrined in policy documents over the years, including the NDP, which identifies the private sector really as the key operating tool of achieving our development. And really even having conversations with a lot of players in the private sector. When His Excellency the President was sworn in as the President, I remember Sahel, the Executive Chairman of Sahel, he said, this is the first President that we have coming from the private sector. The first President was from the civil service, second President was from the security services, and Adama Barrow will be the first President for the private sector. And you know, it was an interesting thing, and that fits to your point. There was a lot of expectation, and this was, you know, further heightened when he gave that particular statement. So over the last 3 years, has the private sector been positioned as the anchor of growth in this country, from my experience, I would really say no. You know, I don't really see any material change in terms of positioning or policy that would lead me to say that. Now, however, there are short-term variations. If you look at the country, you know, if you look at the Gambia economically, it's an open economy, small open economy. And sometimes, you know, we move with the ebbs and flows of sometimes the international economy and certain key sectors like tourism, agriculture. Right now, maybe it's where we're, over the last 2 years, I think macroeconomically, it's not still the best, but there's a little bit of macroeconomic stability. So because of that, you see that the current business sentiment, maybe it's better than before. And you would even see this, for example, in the MPC surveys. The last MPC report, they indicated that the business sentiment survey, it's a bit more positive. So there are those little short-term things, but structurally and fundamentally, I do not believe that. And really, and now, that is now been reflected in some of these other surveys, which is, and the premier one, as you would say, is the World Bank Doing Business report. So what does this report signify? It's simple, especially in a country like Gambia, where you don't have a lot of coverage from if you want information on the country, if you are big, maybe you can be a development partner, you can be an investor, you can be a multilateral. What information are you getting about the country? The World Bank Doing Business survey is a reference point that is used by a lot of institutions. So that is one of the few touch points that they have in getting information about your country. So your ranking and how you perform in that regard is very fundamental. And the fact that, you know, that survey has indicating the decline, and if you look at it, this is not a short-term decline. We have to say that this is something that is really continuing a trend that started before Adama Barrow. But this trend is being continued according to this survey. Yeah, so really that for me answers the question. I don't think that the private sector has really, you know, the environment has really transformed really to be able to position the country, to drive the country's development objectives.
You made an interesting point, and I just want to sort of expand on that a little before I get into other more interesting discussions. You made the point that you've not really seen the private sector being anchored as the engine of growth. So whereas the talk is there, whereas if you look at the NDP, which is the National Development Plan of the country, has placed the private sector in the center of that economic development blueprint. The support that is needed by the private sector to really make that happen has been questioned. What in your thinking is it, you know, and here I would want you to outline one or two things that if that is done, definitely we could see or begin to see some traction, if you will, in terms of the private sector taking the lead in the economic development aspirations of this country.
Okay, thank you. And you know, and sometimes it can be from macroeconomic planning to company levels. People always like to look at the big picture. I always believe in activities and specifics. And governing in any country, anything, that's what it boils down to. You want to set a broad agenda. How do you do that? You need to have traction. You need to have successes. It is the one or two things that fill up the whole. So as a country, we have to outline what are our strategic priorities in terms of which sectors are going to drive our development. In my view, it's very clear, and I think this view is really shared by so many people, and it's clear even in our development documents. Gambia is a services center. It's a small country. I know that a friend of mine who always says that, yes, Gambia is a small country, but it's a big country. Simple statement, but if you look at it, there's a lot of meaning behind it. What is it? Gambia is a country that over the years has attracted a lot of people. Even if you look at re-exports, the amount of goods that come out of here, a significant percentage is going out. So the port is feeding more than a market of 2 million people. So what does that tell you? It's a small market, but it's a big market. It's a country that brings people together. In what avenues? Services, tourism. For me, these are key strategic anchors. And like services is the broad sector, but within services there are key strategic ones. Tourism obviously is one of them. I think the distributive trade is one. But within the whole services sector, financial services, education, you know, leisure around there, these are significant value centers that can feed the regional market. And this is where we need to concentrate on. And how do we concentrate? For me, first thing, I think there needs to be a fundamental change in government thinking. Fundamental change in what? Government transitions from an owner-operator to what? Policymaker, regulator. That is not the case. You do that. How do you do that? Time-bound policies that you implement with who? The private sector. So within that, you sit with the private sector. This is the plan. This is what we want to do. Specific targets. Not talk about it. Specific targets, and then there's ownership from the top down, and you achieve that. So if we say, now to be more specific, we say your sector, which you know well, and so I'll go to tourism. What is our tourism value proposition? I have two things that I believe are material. One, you know, the access is our biggest challenge. You know that if Gambia, tourism could be a year-round activity, the economic impact will be tremendous. We see the difference. Every average Gambian knows the difference between the tourist season and not when it's a tourist season. Wouldn't that be a good starting point for the country to now build off? Now, if you say, okay, all right, our target as a whole country is we want to diversify our tourism product. So we want to have this market, this market, this market, this market. We want to identify them, and we have a target by year 1, year 2, year 3. We want to target this amount of people, this amount of people, this amount of people. And you build a holistic strategy from the top down, and who implements it? Only private sector players implement it. And it's very specific. With that, there's supervision from the level so that everything moves down. And who does it? It's the private sector. Why? Because who are the operators? It's the hotels. Who is going to market and sell it? Who's best at marketing and selling? If, for example, GT Board is working with a travel and tour company, and I have an arrangement with you, because GT Board can do certain things, I can access to you, but I give you a target. If you can sell this market and give me 2,000, 3,000 visitors, and there are clear time marks where a private sector player can make money, there's a higher probability of us getting success in that regard than maybe GT Board trying to do everything in itself. Yeah? Because GT Board, GT Board is maybe putting money, the private sector is putting money. So the chances of success are much higher. You do that, and you don't need 100 of these projects. You need 1, 2, or 3 in strategic things, and it's a country-wide project. And I'll just, to think with tourism, I use this example, like Ghana, what they're doing. You see what the year of the return 2019, I don't know whether you've been following what they're doing. This is an extremely strategic project from the top down, the president himself. There's a whole branding, whole concept around it. And they're just leveraging on sometimes even existing events that are happening in the country, but they say that they want to position themselves to be the key tourist market for the diaspora, especially the African Americans who are gone all over diaspora and want to the heritage tourism, which is your field. They have a clear, concise program being championed and moved by the president and key strategic government institutions, but being run and operated by strategic private sector. Let's follow that track. Now what we're saying here is on record. There's a high probability that there will be a lot of success coming out of that program. We need to be thinking along the same lines.
Not to cut you there. Since we were talking about that, I mean, but I mean, it's all still part of the private sector development. But I think, I mean, I always say that as a country, we had lost the opportunity to really leverage and tap the Kunta Kinte gift, if I may call it that. I mean, because what could have been done with that market, we have not even scratched, I mean, the surface. And it is rather unfortunate that, you know, just when we're thinking in terms of how do we strategically really position Kunta Kinte as a product, you know, as a tourism product in connection with the diaspora, and this was why we were trying to establish links with Baltimore,
Yeah, that's right.
and Mississippi.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
Some unfortunate. We have this. Change in government.
Yeah.
There should have been continuity.
That's right.
Because what has changed? Nothing has changed. It's actually only the executive that has changed.
Yes.
You know, meaning cabinet.
Yes.
So, but everybody else is still in position, and
Yes.
they should have continued to pursue that. And there is so much to be leveraged from that. Because we've done a lot in terms of and this is now what Ghana is perhaps
Exactly.
saying. Senegal has endeavored, and Senegal has been doing it, though in a small scale.
Yeah.
And one could even say that they've done a whole lot more than we have as a country in terms of even making a claim that Kunta Kinte,
But
is from Senegal.
Just to agree with your point, and even using Senegal specifically, is what they are doing in terms of tourism, strategic investments and planning around it. If you are not careful, not only in the distributive trade sector, really, now they've got us boxed in a way. Tourism is the same. It's how the key tech segments, one I just talked about is the marketing, clear product, selling it and how you are doing it, and the access points. You know what they're doing now? In all of the regional capitals, they're building what? International airports. If you can fly from anywhere in the world to go to Casamance or Ziguinchor, you've been to Ziguinchor before. They, in terms of tourism, what they can offer, it's the same thing that we can offer, even more. So if they're marketing it and they have better positioning, that's a significant existential threat for our current product program even. You see? So what it requires is a holistic strategy. And I'm saying, we really, if you want to break it down in simplistic terms, this is where it starts. The private sector is the engine of growth. Yes, if you say it, we all agree. Now how? What we are doing, no. From my perspective, it's not good enough. There are good things, and within it, there are good things happening. There are some things, but on aggregate, I wouldn't say that it's good. And this is seen in the rankings that we're talking about. But so how do we tackle it? I think some of the points that I mentioned before are really, that's my view of how we can really make a fundamental change.
Let me go back to the World Bank Group Ease of Doing Business ranking, and here I want to read an excerpt from that report. It said, in sub-Saharan Africa, Togo represents a bright spot. Sub-Saharan Africa remains one of the weak performing regions on the ease of doing business, with an average score of 51.8, well below the OECD high income economy average of 78.4 and the global average of 63. Compared to the previous year, sub-Saharan Africa economies raised their average ease of doing business score by just 1 percentage point in Doing Business 2020, whereas economies in the Middle East and North Africa region raised their average score by 1.9. If you look at the sub-Saharan Africa average, we're looking at 51.8. Gambia's ranking is 50.3. So it is below the average of sub-Saharan Africa. How serious is this, and what are the implications in terms of attracting FDI, foreign direct investment? Because I know you started to allude that. And what can we do to help change this situation? Because ordinarily we should have been at worst within the average, but we are below the average ranking within sub-Saharan Africa. So what could we do to change that?
Firstly, I think the first fund to start is to appreciate the importance of this report. What is this report? It's an output report. You can look at it like that. It tells you the outcomes of things that you are doing. And if you look at the report and you check the correlation of the performance of the countries that do well over the period of time, and you check it up with GDP growth and social indicators, you would see it's positively correlated. That doesn't mean that the report says that you should do that. The report doesn't really tell you that. The report, what it tracks is fundamentally, we see countries that usually do well along these lines, and we check certain indicators. And if you look at it over time, it's true. There's a positive correlation with that. So if countries are doing well along these very targeted mechanisms, it shows that it feeds. I mean, the numbers don't lie. So now, it's like you kind of reverse engineer it if you say you want to use it. Now, how these issues that the report is tackling, how can we, even if you want it for simplistic terms, how can we go back and see what feeds into it, and now how do we tackle that? Now let me give you some concrete examples, and then I'll clarify my points. If you look at a country like Senegal, and the reforms I'm telling you is very simple. Some of them, they're good things and bad things about them. But it's the reform programs that really started in the 80s. Yeah? Structural adjustment. What is simple? Liberalize your economies, empower your people. Liberal economics, the liberal tradition, that is the most fundamental core about it. Empowering people and providing the mechanisms for them to do that. Over the period of time, Africa, and I think increasingly we are becoming more ready for that environment. Why? Because people are learning more. The knowledge gap is slowly being closed. So this is a process that we need to continue. Gambia was the darling of the reform period during the structural adjustment early period. And you could see that in the time. We were the leading country in a lot of these metrics. Senegal, all the countries, even from civil service reform to how our privatization program was going, the performance of our key public sector institution, parastatals. But obviously with the revolution, that process was stunted to a large part. I think we need to reignite that agenda and make it, because that was a strategic project. If you tell the people who are the NIB days, that's what it was. For a government, it was like, this is what we are concentrating on. And you have the key implementer was the NIB at the time. So even if you can see, which is our current GAIPA, but that was a core. It's like, for example, if you go to cabinet, I don't know how cabinet worked at the time, but what I would assume was that this is an issue that is discussed on a regular standard operating procedure of government. So it has to be to that level of detail. I think this is what we need to start doing. And then we look at what key reforms do we need to do. Short term, medium term, long term. What are the low hanging fruit that gets you the traction? Because that's the most important part. With anything that you're doing, you need to have a clear activities and have successes. Because it's the success that gives you the traction. I'll use an example that maybe not be too. Firstly, I think I forgot to close the point I wanted to point about Senegal. Senegal, when Ablaye Wade when really, particularly in 2007, that's really when they really deepened the reform process. And Senegal really came from a lower base because it's the Francophone socialist system. There was a lot of government operation in the economy. So that's why we've always been competitive with Senegal, against Senegal, and we're still to a point. So they've had to come a long way. But now look at it, since 2007 to date. Look at the World Business Ranking. 2007, I think it was 146. Now they are 123. Look at a country that I love the most because I think it fits us better. Mauritius. Why? Because it's a small, open economy like Gambia. 2 million people. So it's like very similar to Gambia. Their per capita GDP is $10,000 odd dollars. We are 686. You know what the ranking in the world business is? 13. They're top 20 globally. That is our model. That is our model. And how do you do it? You have to have, when you have systems and processes that work, now empower the people. It is the people that give you the development. It is the private side, and the private side really is the people. The civil service society, doesn't matter. The government, what is it? It is a policy maker, regulator. And with this we can talk, maybe if the time allows, there may be specific things that we can talk in terms of a reform program, legal, financial services, and competitive. So a lot of things that you can talk about that are specifics that they could actually do, which I think could add a lot of value.
Let me come to the bit regarding reforms, and I know that we would not be able to go in detail, but it's perhaps a significant reform that this country is oversighting, and that is civil service reform.
Yes.
We can sit here and talk about all these wonderful ideas and how we could emulate the likes of Mauritius, because there are so many similarities. Perhaps we now have to look at Mauritius instead of Singapore, given the fact that Singapore, has gone way ahead of us. But civil service reform, you made the point earlier that the focus of government should be policy and regulation. And I cannot agree with you more, and that government should really wash its hands of anything that has to do with business. But crucial to that equation is the issue of who are the people who are running the affairs of the civil service. We have spoken about civil service reform, and I dare say as far back as the Jawara days, when we were talking of the mega projects which coincided with the coup d'etat in 1994, you know, years before that, and all of these big projects that were being conceived and conceptualized. We have spoken about civil service reform under the Jammeh administration. Civil service reform, as it were, is still on the table and agenda of the Barrow administration, but we are not seeing much progress. And here let me perhaps make a point that people may not be happy with, but it's a reality, and we have to be discussing these issues. Can a civil service that is so apprehensive to dole out opportunities to the private players, in which the private players would be earning in the millions, whilst their salaries are pittance? Can the civil service, does the civil service have the stomach? I mean, I make this point because we have had complaints in terms of certain big projects, consultancy projects being awarded to foreign firms when there are capable private businesses that can do such. I can talk of the EY audit consulting opportunity that was given, you know, to a foreign firm. When you have a number of local auditing firms with good capacity, if not, better or comparable, and they've not been given this opportunity, along with others as well that we can speak about. Does the government realize that this private sector-led development initiative that they have encapsulated within the NDP, and even prior to that Vision 2020, do we realize as a government that these are the sort of opportunities that the private sector have to be given for the private sector to be the engine of growth? Do we realize this? I mean,
in my area of expertise, and this is where I always say, and this is where I always enjoy having my conversations with you, because everybody, you bring your expertise to the table. I do not have expertise in the private sector in terms of working within the private sector, understanding incentive systems, operational processes. My main experience with them is as working with them, as maybe I would say more from an arm's length perspective. So from my view, you know, it's hard for me, there are certain things that is very hard for me to place their capacity to be able to implement reform. Where I can concentrate a lot is my area of expertise and the output. And the output, we don't have a lot of successes to say. So that automatically that means that there's still a lot of scope for growth. Now, the point that you mentioned, I think when you said it's not even using that specific example, it's not only within the civil service. I think it's generally in this country. We are not prepared to support each other. And you see this driving every day on the roads, the traffic. You know, we have few main roads, you know, just sometimes to someone to allow you to get access on the road, and they know you need to get on the road because this is the only road you have to move. They will be fighting you to cut across. It's sad, but you find very few people who have the mindset that, okay, one go, one come, one go, and you tend to find that the traffic moves quicker. And when you go to Europe, sometimes you go to see traffic systems that is based like that. There's no traffic light, but cars, they come, this one moves, this one moves. That's actually how it's based. But that tells you something about the mindset of the people. Now, how do you change mindsets? That is where it comes down to. It's a mindset thing, and that is extremely difficult. And really, usually, it has to start from the top. That's what I'm saying. So if you're talking about civil service reform, in terms of supporting the business, empowering the private sector, there has to be a fundamental change in mindset. That I think we all have to accept it. And what is that fundamental change in mindset? Can you change how people operate over a period of time, especially people who are adults? It's very hard to do that. But what can you change? If you have a leader and you can clearly outline the key levers that you need to control, and those controls, what are activities, outcomes? Now, when you outline those time-bound specific activities and outcomes, now it's easy to control. The mindset doesn't matter. It's the activity that matters. Even if you do not, for example, if I have if you have a policy that there's no consulting that we will not do without private local participation. Whether even if you don't like me, you don't want to give an opportunity now, you don't have a choice. That is what the activities do to counter that. So what I'm saying is, in terms of specifics, it comes to that. There needs to be a fundamental change in the mindset. How do we do this? From the top, we need to set up a specific, clear program, with time-bound activities and outcome, time-bound. With who's going to do this? Private sector and public sector participation. So this particular set of activities that we decide we're all going to do, we need to come and say, this is la 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 la. Once we agree on that, what are the key information about that we need to do? And that becomes national priority programs driven from the top. And as I mentioned, we don't need 1,000 of them. 1, 2, 3 gives you the traction that you need to start pushing. When you start doing that, I believe, that is how mindsets start to change, slowly by slowly, because you have the mindset is like this, but you have a significant force that is helping to counter that particular mindset, And the issue of traction, this is an example. It's not necessarily a nice one because it harps back to the days, but I remember as a young person, during the transition, 1994, I was very young. But as I have grown older, there's one thing now I appreciate, that the young group of people who took over the power really is a lesson to all of us, for young people, that when you're not ready for certain responsibilities, even if God has blessed you with significant abilities, you can really mess yourself up. It's a lesson. But what I wanted to say is, when they took over power, when I look at it, I think they were very strategic. You remember when I was young, the TV project, the airport project, you remember? Big, shiny projects. Why do you do that? That's the traction. That gives you the traction that you need for your projects to start to move. People, as Mr. Ture always like to say, people, they live on hope. You can never satisfy them. But if you give them hope, that gives you the support that you need to drive the key reforms that you need to drive.
Hold that thought. We'll take a break for now, and then we'll come back shortly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ajib Bank Limited opens a new branch along Kairaba Avenue. Address, Gaipa House, 48 Kairaba Avenue. Ajib Bank, the only Islamic bank in the Gambia. Ajib Bank, your investment partner.
Thank you and welcome back, viewers. We left up at a very important point that you made. And perhaps for the benefit of our Wolof listeners, I always remember this saying that an old lady once told me. He said, "Dom maneko nam unama yakar lenyo weye." And that is pretty much the point that you are making here. And I always remember that saying, of this lady that I met. But getting back to specifics, and I want to share with you a quote by Louise Kanyonga. And she is the head of the Rwanda Development Board Strategy and Competitiveness Department. And this is what she had to say about Rwanda, given the stellar performance of Rwanda and also its ranking in the 2020 World Bank Business Report. She said, Rwanda has adopted a very bold and ambitious approach to reforming its business environment. We benchmark ourselves against the best performers in the world, and we think big. She went on to say, the government set out to create an environment that would enable businesses and investments to thrive through a consensus that was reached after the genocide and civil war years, that the private sector must be the engine of economic growth. Pretty much what she is referring to we have encapsulated in our Vision 2020 development blueprint. We have encapsulated in our, National Development Plan blueprint as well. And yet still, after 50 years, we are not going anywhere. I mean, I know the question I'm going to ask, one may consider it to be repetitive, but I want to go back to the point and ask, why is that? Why is it that despite the fact that we have put these things in our economic development blueprints, and I can go as far back as 1965, when we had our sessional development papers and our 5-year development plans and aspirations under the Jawara regime. We have not gone anywhere. I would make a quote here. When the NIB building was being opened by His Excellency Sir Dawda, the then Chief Executive Officer, I believe, or Managing Director was Abdoulaye Toure Bax. Yeah, yeah. And during Jawara's delivery, he said at the time that the focus of the economy was going to be on privatization. Yeah, and the whole idea was privatize state-owned enterprises and let them push the economic development agenda, which is pretty much in line with what this issue of the private sector being the engine of growth. So you go as far back as when NIB, the building, was being launched. Still, we are grappling with economic development. Why is that?
If you look at the metrics, in a lot of cases, as you mentioned, we've gone down. We've gone backwards in so many ways. If you look at poverty headcount from 2010 till, I think the last one I can remember, we've gone down on that one. I think youth unemployment, I know there were some new metrics that came down. It's gone up. So really, even the statistics out there, they're not like, we don't need to be couching it. We are not doing as well as we need to be doing. Yes, amongst those things, I think there are pockets of success, and those pockets of success should be kind of replicated. And again, you like specifics. Let's go to the specifics. Empowering somebody, really, it's all based on activity. And activity is what? I give you the time and the resources. And then you implement. That is really empowering. And I can give you specific examples in the sense, one of our key strategic institutions is GT Board. I think it's even more strategic than we need to allow. When it's strategic, you really need to know that this is a strategic, because this is what 21% of the GDP, direct and indirect contribution, is coming from tourism. And even if you look at GT Board, it's also a model for a lot of private sector institutions. They're good, they're bad, but they do well in a lot of things. Even if you look at the NDP review, I think they're one of the better performing institutions. I can point to other institutions, Gumworks, SDF. There are a few other ones. They are not perfect, but what does this tell you? That when you position private sector and government, you work together to address a specific outcome, there's success that can be there. How do we replicate it? Now, if you look at a country that recently had an opportunity through the American Chamber of Commerce and the Gambia Angel Investors Network, which is another project being supported by the ITC, GAIPA, GCCI, and to go and visit Miami. Miami is like Gambia in terms of the environment, and they live off tourism. The institution that is responsible for promoting and selling Miami is a private sector institution. They do exactly really the same things that GT board does, with the capacity to do more, but it's private sector. And how do they get their income? Through the taxes that come from the hotel. What does that tell you? Because with private sector, what do they have? They have incentives. If you have an incentive that, one, I'm going to contribute my resources. You know, when private sector brings you that, they'll bring you expertise, they'll bring you resources. If you're investing some, they'll also mobilize resources. But they have an incentive to deliver, because that is what their sustainability is based on.
Do it or die.
Do it or die. It's that simple. So for me, if you want to tell me what do we need to do, Let's build more successes of that kind of a framework in our key strategic sectors, and we can move a long way. How do we do this? I have some key specific suggestions or anecdotes, if I can say. If you look at currently in this country, development cooperation is over, that I can count, 300 million, a lot of it in agriculture. Some of this is not free money. Some of this is even loans that even counts against our capacity, against our foreign debt, so our capacity of the country to be able to leverage more capital. Are we making the most of these amounts? How many projects do you know in agriculture? There are a lot of good ones. NEMA, FASDEP, there's a lot of money in agriculture. But how is that maximizing our strategic objectives? Because the way I see it is, we need to concentrate on a few sectors that we have traction to grow, and it's that sectors that pull other sectors. Example is the classic example. Contributing less and less for GDP, yes, hires a lot of people, but if you look at it even in classic economic terms, a lot of those people are unproductive. Yeah, there's surplus labor in agriculture.
It's the sector with the lowest productivity.
Exactly. Yeah. So we don't need all those people in that sector. What we need is a lot of the demand for agri is going to be driven by the other sectors, the hotels, the restaurants, our services proposition. If it's a financial services center, if you have all the big banks in Nigeria, for example, the HQ, if you make it a national priority, your headquarters, I want it in Gambia. I will do whatever. What do I need to do to make it happen? You know how much value that will bring to this economy, like Mauritius is doing? Mauritius is the financial services center of more or less Africa now. A lot of the big private equity venture capital, they are registered in Mauritius. So if we target sector like tourism, financial services, the trade, even another one you talked about, the cultural heritage, the music festivals like reggae. Reggae is a multi-billion-dollar industry. We know that Gambia is a recognized venue in the reggae calendar. What are we doing to maximize that? And we have a lot of solid private sector operators who are working in that, who are proven that they can give you value. How can we support those people? So in short, what do we need? And I'll use the example of Senegal and my president, Abdoulaye Wade, is somebody that I admire a lot because he made fundamental change in the country. He moved it. Nobody can deny that. I lived in Senegal. I know from 2000, the way they are now is the fundamental change he did. What did he do? Each sector, I target some people and I need successes. How do I support you? You don't support anybody. You support, can I use Wolof?
Yeah.
Your champions, not only economically, but who have a love for the country at heart, contributing socially to the you can have your indicators. If you have successes, those ones will be the ones who will help you to drag everybody that you need to move. I think for me, and this is not rocket science, and this is, if you look at a lot of the countries, this is the development path, the ones we like to quote. All of them, Korea, now we can talk about Rwanda. It's the same story. One tells you all. It's a matter of now doing it. And doing it is what? Clear, specific, time-bound activities that you track ownership from the top.
Let me look at the report and now go into specifics. There were 2 points that were made in terms of the Gambia as a country. The report spoke of and gave credit to the Gambia for doing away with the company seal requirement. I don't know, many people will say, well, that's neither here nor there in terms of what would actually push and drive business, what would get the private sector to truly be the engine of economic growth. But the other point that they gave the country credit to was paying taxes. And I think where credit is due, we have to give credit. And we have to give credit to the Gambia Revenue Authority, even though they have been under attack for some time in terms of the dependency of the economy on taxes, direct taxes. The report quoted that the GRA, the government, has made the paying of taxes less costly. And also the positive in terms of having reduced the corporate tax rate and the turnover tax rate, which I think it's positive, and hence my saying that we should give credit to the GRA and to the Ministry of Finance by extension. But if you look at the report, I mean, and you started to talk about this, that there are parameters that the report tracks, and this is standard across the board. There are 12 parameters. Naturally, the taxes is one of them, and starting a business, how easy it is. We cannot get on to all of them. I mean, electricity is an issue, registering property, getting credit, access to finance, which has been a major sticking point in terms of our country. Trading across borders, we know the challenges that obtain between Senegal and the Gambia, or even Gambia and ECOWAS within the ECOWAS sub-region. So these are all some of the parameters that they're looking, resolving issues of insolvency and enforcing contracts. So if we look at the situation of the Gambia, we have improved in two. You know, I mean, well, if we want to be technical, we've improved in one out of the 12, and that is paying taxes. You made the point earlier that perhaps we need to focus on specific sectors and identify target activities that the government should now focus and drive in view of these 12 parameters that the World Bank business report focuses on. And we see how do we strategically improve on these 12 parameters over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
That's right.
I mean, hopefully if we do that, we'll get somewhere.
That's right.
But do you think that the government thinks about this in this perspective? Because if the government was really paying attention to this report, whether it's the World Bank doing business or the World Economic Forum report, you know, or other indices as well in terms of ease of doing business, if they were following these reports rigorously and paying attention to them and wanting to improve the business environment, one would think that there'll be an institution or a number of institutions that would focus on these parameters, engage government. How do we make sure that year in, year out, we improving on these parameters, even if it's a small increase on an annual basis? And by the time you say 5 years, perhaps we could see the ranking of Gambia dropping from the 140-something to the 120s and ultimately within the hundreds and the 90 position. What do you think? Would you advise that this is perhaps something that government needs to look at and do?
I would advise that this report, as an output indicator, it's important that it is a key operating indicator that is tracked from the highest level. And this is what you talked about. In terms of government ownership of particular things, I don't know, I've never been in government, but I can imagine that the government agenda on a daily basis is, significant. So many sectors. But each sector is the level of priority, outlines the level of resources, time, etc. that you put to projects. Should be one of them, in my view. That's an opinion. But if it's like that, I would like to believe that this report would be part of the agenda of activities that are under consideration. But this report really is an output report. We should look at it as it shouldn't be the focus or the driver of our reform program. Our reform program should acknowledge the value of the report in telling us our progress and in selling the country and increasing the capacity of the country to be able to attract capital to drive the growth that we need to have. So I think from that perspective, that's what we need to do. But what is more fundamental, I think, as you mentioned, is I think there's a lot of documentation in terms of our strategic planning, even our industry level planning, sector level planning. You're very conversed with the tourism sector. Everything that I want to say in tourism is already been planned because I've read it. The tourism master plan, and I have a lot of linkages, touch points with people. So the plans, they're there. Now it's just a matter of how is the best way of implementing those plans. Now, within the private sector, public sector cooperation, I think, as I mentioned, I think there's some key strategic institutions in this country. GAIPA is one of them, one of the most strategic institutions in this country. The GT board is one of them. You know which one? Another one, which we don't even talk about? GIA. Seriously. That should be, if there's a company that the state is going to lose money on in terms of subsidizing, I'd rather it lose money on GIA than anywhere, because that is our access. You know, you are in tourism, you know, what is the biggest choke point? Access. And the rest is marketing. Marketing you can sell. We have so many people, GT board, and so many people just in Gambia operating within the sector. If you empower them, they can sell the country for you, bring you tourists, bring you people. But the access, the fundamental things that government is really better positioned, or a kind of a big type institution, is GIA. You know, those are, and obviously the other institutions, like we talk about the rest. I mean, security services for me, that is fundamental. I always like to talk about, for me, that is the most fundamental institutions of state. For me, when I want to, you know, if you're a government, one of the key traction points, and this is not my area, but I'm just telling you as a citizen, what I would really love to see, if you had a reform program, all the police stations, we reform them top standard. You see, you should never see a policeman and even think of disrespecting them. You see, or not having respect for them, because that represents the state. Whether it's an investor, that's their first touch point with the country. When I come in how I see the immigration officials at the airport, that is where they start to assess your country. If they come in, and you see it in the countries that you go to Senegal, you see it there, the level of professionalism, that is where it starts. So those are the little things that we can be doing. How do we support our key? And now, the other part, the government, and this is where you're talking about the support. If the support, maybe the mindset is not there that people openly support, the government has to make it a strategic priority. And this is what I'm saying, at the level of the president. That's the only way it can go. In all our key sectors, who are our champions? You have to identify them, you have to support them. And part of your success story is saying that we made this person, this person, this person.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, come on. As I like to say in Wolof, what it is, in Wolof, nit moy garabam. Everybody, God has blessed everybody in things. Entrepreneurs are one of the key people that move countries. So we have to support them. If you're entrepreneur, you don't support them, wherever they go, they'll be successful. If Gambia drives them out, they'll go to Senegal, they'll go to they have the elements. The country should be able to maximize that, because that is what makes the growth. And it's not only entrepreneurs, swing defkati. That is the mindset. We have to be able to support the people who are driving value. If we do that, I think really there can be a lot of success in a very short period of time.
You spoke about the security and the police, and I cannot agree with you more. And hence the need for the civil service reform to happen, because I mean, we see a number of things that I know all of us are not comfortable with in terms of the kind of bribery activities that goes on. You cannot blame the police. You know, I mean, I know exactly why that is happening. But if we undertake our civil service reform, get the professionals, pay them the value that they're doling out, I think we would begin to make progress. But talking about Sun Defkati, and perhaps the last point that we would have to discuss on this program, entrepreneurship, because wherever you hear entrepreneurship is about defkati, entrepreneurs. Now, according to the 2020 World Bank report, greater ease of doing business, and here I'm quoting, greater ease of doing business is associated with high levels of entrepreneurship. Do you agree with this view of the report, and why?
Yes. Why? And I think I've answered it. In my view, what I've seen across space, time, it's entrepreneurs and people that move countries. That's what really drive development of countries. So the more we support our entrepreneurs and people who are particularly entrepreneurs with vision, strategic. You have a lot of entrepreneurs, some are just doing for surviving, but there are some who want to build, who are great builders. One of your key tasks as a country is identifying them and knowing how can I support them. And you support them. You support them, make it a national strategic priority. You're going to get success. We can look at the terrain. We don't need to mention names. But if you look at a lot of the sector where you see progress in the country, who's driving that progress?
And there's nothing wrong. You know, I mean, I was going to say, when you said that other countries have done it, if we today, I mean, in this day and age, we talk of the likes of Samsung and stuff.
Yes.
These were family-owned businesses. You go to the United States
Bulls,
of America.
the champions.
Exactly. In the Western world, they were called the comprador class. Made by government, but they were made by government for a reason.
For a specific reason.
Yeah. But again, let me
held to that reason. Held to account for that reason.
Well, Senegal. I mean, you spoke of Ablaye Wade.
Yes.
When Ablaye Wade came into the presidency, as long as basic food commodities were concerned, it was the domain and the territory of the Lebanese.
Yes.
But go to Senegal now. What have we seen? Because he undertook, and made sure that changed. Yes. And who are the people now who's controlling the commodities in Senegal?
Yes.
Who made them?
Yes.
Because they were second or third tier
Yes.
compared to the Lebanese. And I think this is where we need to wake up as a government to realize that you have to help to make the people, but you have to hold the people that you are making accountable.
That's
and
right.
they also have to participate and help in promoting the economic development agenda.
That's
but
right.
you mentioned two institutions. You mentioned GIPA, you mentioned GT Board, and I'm also going to bring GCCI.
Yes.
What is GCCI doing? How can GCCI really help? Because this is the Gambia Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I mean, yes, they have made some meaningful gains over the years, but game changer, how can they be a more formidable game changer in view of the bit that we spoke about entrepreneurship and in view of pushing the private sector to be the engine of economic growth? What is their role to task government to make a change?
In my view, GCCI, let me put it this way, it's not only GCCI. I say we need more GCCIs, even industry level. And GCCI should be the standard for them. As you said, no institution is perfect. But if you look at GCCI as a body, it's a professionally run institution. Yeah, there are obviously things that they can be done better, but with professionalization, with professionalism and organization, you get outcomes. And if you look at a lot of key programming, GCCI is really the key anchor of private sector input into that programming. What can we do? We need to support that mechanism and make it stronger. You know what GCCI represents? Gambia, and you know Gambia. You know what the hardest thing in this country is, and we talk about it all the time. And again, my apologies for our fellow Gambians. Wolof is my main vernacular language, so I always like to mbolo, which is togetherness. GCCI is one of those. It already represents that. All the key institutions in this country. So GCCI represents an institution that allows for us to get them to work together. Already that is a big gain. Now, how can we maximize that? Yeah? We need to now, the better engagement, so private sector in itself, it has to be better organized so that it can feed that organization into the activities of GCCI. So then GCCI's outcomes are clear and they're strategic. If you have better organized industry like in the tourism, the hoteliers, and industry organizations, they are big institutions because all the research and development, they do it together. They work together to outline even the marketing promotion. The hotel should be one of the biggest people who are investing in marketing and promotion, just in tourism, for example. But it's through industry organizations that allows for collective effort. Those guys need to be strong. They need to be able to learn to work to each other, not be content with maybe just doing business in your own little island and silo. You are doing well, but really your impact could be more if you prepare to work in the collective. So I think GCCI, yes, there's a lot of things that maybe they always scope for improvement, but I think it's really a model for how private sector institutions can come together and work in an organization.
Well, Mr. Senghor, we're going to have to leave it at that. This is all that time has allowed us, but it was great to have you on this program.
Thank you very much.
And we hope that we would be seeing you again in the near future.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. This was all we had for you today. As usual, time is never on our side. Until we come your way next time, goodbye for now.